This is Sky News at 2, our top stories. Sky News understands the Prime Minister will reshuffle her cabinet this afternoon. We'll bring you that live. Theresa May will appoint her new team despite a chorus of voices from within her own party saying she should quit.
I just can't see how she can continue with any long-term way. I think she will have to go, unfortunately.
No deal yet. The leader of the DUP will meet Mrs May on Tuesday after Downing Street mistakenly announces they'd reached an agreement. We're ready to govern. Jeremy Corbyn says Labour will try to change the Queen's speech and is ready to negotiate Brexit, also this lunchtime. Police release pictures of the fake suicide belts worn by the London Bridge terrorists as one of the first officers on the scene relives the night.
A stream of people came out of the market, running and screaming, so we literally just pushed them into the basement of the pub.
In sport, England's under-20 footballers win the World Cup. Rafael Nadal goes for 10 French Open titles, and South Africa self-destruct against holders India in the Champions Trophy.
Good afternoon. Sky News understands that Theresa May will reshuffle her cabinet this afternoon as she tries to hold on to power. That despite being called a dead woman walking by a former colleague and a chorus of Conservative voices saying she must resign. Mrs May will meet the DUP leader Arlene Foster on Tuesday, even though Downing Street had mistakenly announced a deal had already been done. All this as the Conservative Party appears to split over whether Mrs May should stay or go, with MP Anna Soubry and former Chancellor George Osborne saying Theresa May's time in number 10 was limited.
I think her position is, in the long term, untenable. Not for some time. Let's get this clear. We need stability.
And the former Chancellor George Osborne had a similar assessment of Mrs May's future.
Theresa May is a dead woman walking.
But there are those within the Conservative Party who still support Theresa May and say others should do the same.
Well, in 6 or 12 months' time, if we have another general election, it will be the fault of those MPs in my party who are trying to capitalise on this situation.
Negotiations.
Well, let's go live to Downing Street now, and our political correspondent Beth Rigby. And Beth, with this reshuffle just about to happen, Theresa May hasn't got a great deal of room for manoeuvre.
Hi, Becky, that's right. Different voices there from the party, weren't there? You had Anna Soubry and George Osborne, who were sacked by Theresa May when she came into power into number 10 last year, and they are clearly on the wing of she has to go. It's just a question of when, not if. And then you had Karen Bradley, the Culture Secretary, and Queen's speech. Beyond that, who knows?
OK, thanks very much. Beth will be back with you for that cabinet reshuffle, hopefully a bit later on. Now, photos of fake suicide belts made using disposable water bottles wrapped in masking tape, worn by the London Bridge attackers, have been released by police. Meanwhile, one of the first officers on the scene has told how he helped more than 200 people hide from danger in a pub cellar. He said that the memories will stay with him for a long time. Sky's Dan Whitehead had this report.
1 week on from the London attack, new images have been released by police. But its stalls will open to the public again this week. Dan Whitehead, Sky News.
Richard Hammond has spoken about his dramatic car accident in Switzerland yesterday. The former Top Gear presenter escaped serious injury when his electric supercar crashed. He was airlifted to hospital with a fractured knee. The TV presenter recorded a message from his hospital bed.
Yes, it's true. I've been there again. Net result being I'm here in a hospital in Switzerland. This is my knee that they're going to turn from this into this, giving me a Swiss Army knee, hopefully later today. I'd like to thank all of the medical professionals who got me by air ambulance from the crash to this hospital and have dealt with me ever since. I'd like to say thank you as well to James May, who smuggled a bottle of gin in for me last night. I shouldn't have said that out loud. And most importantly, sorry to my wife Mindy and my daughters Izzy and Willow. I'm sorry for being such a colossal... Yeah, all right, thanks James. Thank you. More news later.
Three men have been detained after an EasyJet flight from Slovenia to London was diverted to Cologne over concerns about a suspicious conversation on board. The flight was met by armed police when it landed in Germany, with all 151 passengers put through security checks. A backpack belonging to one of the arrested men was blown up in a controlled explosion. Voting is underway in the first round of France's parliamentary elections. The second round takes place a week from today. It's the first parliamentary elections for President Macron's new En Marche party. US Attorney General Jeff Sessions has agreed to give evidence in the Russia investigation. He'll appear before the Senate Intelligence Committee on Tuesday, but hasn't said yet whether the hearing will be in public. Mr. Sessions says he wants to address matters raised by former FBI Director James Comey. The son of the late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi has been released from prison after more than 5 years in detention. Militia officials based in western Libya confirmed Saif Gaddafi's release, stating that it comes as part of a recent pardon issued by the Libyan parliament. A British yachtsman has been rescued by the Queen Mary luxury cruise ship. The 73-year-old man who was competing in a transatlantic race was hit by 70-mile-an-hour winds and 15-metre-high waves. The UK Coast Guard says he is uninjured and in good spirits. This is Sky News coming up. A cabinet reshuffle is imminent. We'll bring you the very latest from Westminster.
You too.
Now, as we've been saying, the cabinet reshuffle is imminent. We have been expecting it for a few days now. Let's go live to Westminster. I think our correspondent Beth Rigby can bring us up to date with the latest. What are you seeing there, Beth?
Hi, Becky. I can tell you that the reshuffle is now imminent. They're getting ready for whoever has been picked or hasn't been picked to go through these doors. Interestingly, we can't do what we normally do, which is you see ministers walking up from Downing Street. That's because Whitehall has been closed today because there's a cycle race. That's also why the Prime Minister this morning, when she came back to number 10, sort of mid-morning, maybe 11, 12 o'clock, she came through the back gates.
Back with you monitoring events there at Downing Street and all the theatrics going on. In the meantime, though, I'm joined now by Dr. Andrew Blick, who's Director of History and Policy at the Institute of Contemporary British History at King's College, London. Mr. Blick, obviously, this reshuffle due to happen this afternoon. How much manoeuvre has Theresa May got?
Not a great deal, as we can see. People do not like being sacked from the cabinet. I mean, a good example there being George Osborne, who obviously isn't very pleased about the way this was handled for him in the past. So Theresa May does not have a lot of room for manoeuvre. She can't really move people out of the top jobs and move people into the top jobs. And really it's about, I think, mainly trying to alienate as few people as possible.
And Jeremy Corbyn again saying on television this morning that he can be Prime Minister. Is that possible?
Well, anything is possible if you can have a majority within the House of Commons actually willing to remove confidence from the current government, from Theresa May's government, and give confidence to another government. But that would involve a majority being willing to vote for both those things, which would seem to involve, as far as I can see it, the DUP being willing to actually vote to bring down a Conservative government and install a Labour-led coalition or whatever it is that Jeremy Corbyn's talking about.
And speaking of the DUP, Downing Street made this gaffe yesterday, releasing a statement saying that an agreement had been reached and then backtracked. How much impact and effect, if you like, will that have?
It's obviously not inspiring in terms of confidence if we're being told a deal is pretty much done and dusted and then we find out actually it's not. Again, this could be part of a standard kind of negotiating process. Clearly, the DUP are going to have certain things they want in return for offering this support. Equally, the government are aware, the Conservative Party are aware that they'll have to give the DUP something in return, but there are limits. Both groups will be aware that there are limits and there are opportunities, but on the other hand, it does seem to make sense that these two parties can come together and be the most likely government, so there's a shared interest between them in actually making this work.
And Arlene Foster saying that she will do the best for the nation, but what exactly will she want for Northern Ireland?
Well, that's a very interesting question. What will she want for Northern Ireland? I mean, a very important aspect in all of this is Brexit. What kind of Brexit do the DUP want? On the one hand, they're very keen on Brexit. They were pro-leave during the referendum campaign. They like the idea of withdrawing from the European Union. On the other hand, they don't like some of the possible implications of Brexit, including the return of a hard border into Ireland. So there are some complex issues in there, and we'll have to see what exactly the DUP are holding out for.
And in terms of Brexit now, should we be worried? Does Theresa May have much sway in negotiating that deal?
Well, if one buys the argument that Theresa May was floating in advance of the general election, that returning her with a bigger majority would strengthen her position at the negotiating table with the EU, then the converse of that must be that what's just happened has weakened her negotiating position. I mean, I've never wholly been convinced by this idea that the EU are that interested in what precisely the parliamentary majority is in the House of Commons. On the other hand, if it looks like her government could actually fall apart at any moment, or she could be on the way out of her job, that could create problems. And of course, depending on what pressures are brought to bear on her, it may actually change the UK negotiating position in these negotiations anyway.
Well, yeah, picking up on that, do you think we might see a softer Brexit? Is that what people want?
It's very hard to know exactly what people want with Brexit because, you know, as we know, the question on the ballot paper in the 2016 referendum was simply, do you want to leave or remain? It didn't ask us, if you want to leave, in what manner do you want to leave? So we don't really know. But it may be the case that since the election last week, there is a smaller majority for a hard, or a smaller group supporting a hard Brexit. There probably never was a majority supporting Brexit of any kind, actually, in the House of Commons. But it could be argued that the group of people who are willing to press, at least for a soft Brexit, are now more numerous and more powerful in the House of Commons than they were before the election.
And today, George Osborne's saying that Theresa May is a dead woman walking. Is her position untenable, or is she doing the right thing for the country and staying?
Well, I think while she's Prime Minister, she's entitled constitutionally to try and put together a government. And if you look at the numbers, as in 2010, whatever kind of range of theoretical coalitions or alliances might be possible, the most obvious one that's most likely to work in terms of the numbers is a Conservative-DUP arrangement of someone, whatever one might think of that, whatever view one may take of the DUP, that's the one where the numbers work the most plausibly and involves the least complicated arrangement. So as Prime Minister, as sitting Prime Minister, she is entitled to try and put together a deal, which is what she's doing, and then take it to the House of Commons for them to decide if they're willing to wear it or not. OK, thanks very much for your time. Interesting stuff. You're watching Sky News. Coming up, a cabinet reshuffle is imminent. We'll bring you the very latest from Westminster.
Only with Sky Q.
You're watching Sky News. The top stories. The Prime Minister will reshuffle her cabinet this afternoon, despite being branded a dead woman walking by the former Chancellor, George Osborne. Mrs May will meet DUP leader Arlene Foster on Tuesday after Number 10 mistakenly announced an agreement had been reached with the party. And Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says he can still be Prime Minister and that he's ready to fight another election. Well, both Conservative and Labour politicians have questioned what the Democratic Unionists will demand in return for any deal they make with Theresa May. Here to discuss what some of those demands might be is a DUP expert, John Tong, who's a Professor of Politics at Liverpool University. He joins us live now from Manchester. And first of all, Mr. Tong, we know that this cabinet reshuffle is about to be announced. The top 5 positions are going to stay the same. But who else do we think could take other positions?
Well, it's a reshuffle very much at the lower end of the scale because the key positions of Chancellor, of Foreign Secretary, of Brexit Secretary were all announced on Friday anyway. So we're very much at the lower end of the scale, and Theresa May has to replace those people who have lost their jobs due to an election that she called, which was deemed as entirely unnecessary. So there's an air of unreality about this reshuffle because the person who is most likely to be reshuffled out of power, out of government, is Theresa May herself. Her position still looks very, very precarious. There was a remarkable lack in the Sunday papers today, remarkable lack of senior cabinet ministers or senior Conservatives more broadly coming forward to defend her. And then, of course, you had the attacks from beyond the Conservative Party these days, or at least from former allies in terms of George Osborne, saying that she was a dead woman walking. So, you know, this may be the shortest reshuffle of a cabinet that we've ever seen.
We are bringing that in. I mean, how long do you think that she can hang on?
Well, obviously, the first priority is to try and do a deal with the DUP, and already that's been badly handled. Effectively, Theresa May tried to bounce the DUP by the announcement last night that a deal had been done. The DUP won't be bounced by anyone. The DUP have had years of tough negotiations with British governments. They've had years of tough negotiations with Sinn Féin. So they're not going to take an announcement from a severely weakened Prime Minister at 10 Downing Street saying that a deal has been done, when clearly a deal had not been done, because the DUP's shopping list is very, very long indeed, and there's an awful lot of detail to be negotiated.
Yeah, I mean, Arlene Foster saying today that she will work in the national interest, but she's got to want something from this. What is that going to be?
Well, Arlene Foster will work, first of all, in the DUP's interest, then Arlene Foster will work in Northern Ireland's interest, and then Arlene Foster will work in the interest of the Conservatives. So the Conservatives are third in the pecking order. It's important to say that. That said, I'm sure that a deal will be done in terms of a confidence and supply arrangement in which the DUP supports the Conservatives in the key votes, because the DUP would not want another election, because the parliamentary arithmetic has never been so good for the DUP. The DUP can basically name its price because the Conservatives are friendless otherwise at Westminster. The Conservatives will not be able to carry on as a minority government. Jeremy Corbyn has made clear that he will try and bring down the government. The Queen's speech wouldn't get through Parliament, probably without DUP support. So the question then begged is, well, what exactly does the DUP want? The focus has been very much upon the religious and moral agenda of the DUP, but that's really a sideshow. All the DUP are bothered about in that respect is continued vetoes over same-sex marriage and abortion for Northern Ireland. They're not interested in spreading their particular religious and moral agenda over to England, Scotland and Wales. So it's a red herring in that respect. As long as they've got that in place for Northern Ireland, that's all they want. The DUP, to the surprise of many, are actually a left-of-centre party economically. What they want is a big economic package for Northern Ireland, particularly to be delivered to their working-class base. The DUP has a religious vote, but it also has a working-class, secular, loyalist vote. So we're looking at more money from the British government to attract foreign investment to Northern Ireland. We're looking at more money for hospitals, schools and infrastructure projects for Northern Ireland. So the price tag will be very expensive, but it'll be financial, and that is doable. It is affordable for the Conservative government. So expect an awful lot of money, taxpayers' money, to be heading to Northern Ireland sometime soon.
Well, indeed. And then one final word, I suppose, on Brexit, because they wanted a softer Brexit. Do you think that's the stance that Theresa May might look into?
Yes, I think, again, a deal is doable there, because there isn't a great deal of difference in terms of the sort of Brexit the Conservatives and the DUP want. They both want a Brexit which will mean a soft, frictionless border, to use the British government's term, in terms of the island of Ireland, because there are pragmatic reasons for that in terms of trade between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. The only thing the DUP are adamant that they don't want is special status for Northern Ireland, because they believe that's a slippery slope towards a united Ireland. Now, that enrages nationalists, because nationalists want special status for Northern Ireland. The Irish government wouldn't mind special status either. But, you know, broadly, the Conservatives and the DUP are at one in terms of managing Brexit on the island of Ireland. So, again, there's plenty of common ground there.
OK, thanks very much for your time. Appreciate that. And, of course, we are keeping an eye on Downing Street this lunchtime, because we are expecting that cabinet reshuffle any moment. But if you were surprised by the general election result, then you probably weren't keeping a close eye on Facebook. Digital strategists say Labour harnessed social media sites to great effect, bolstering Jeremy Corbyn's swelling support and outflanking the Conservatives for the first time in a major election. So with the polls calling it wrong and an overwhelmingly older readership, can newspapers keep up and tap into the mood of the country? Sky's Ashish Joshi has more.
There's been a shift from right to left, from old to young, from traditional to new. The election and the battle lines are being drawn, but this time they won't be drawn in ink. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
This is Sky News. Coming up, does a hung parliament here strengthen the EU's hand negotiating the Brexit deal? We'll be finding out.
Unity, innit?
Well, it's been a busy day of sport. Let's cross over now to the Sky Sports News studio for an update from there.
Good afternoon. England under-20 footballers have won the World Cup. They've into Formula One. There's more for you over on Sky Sports News HQ.
OK, thanks very much for that. Let's take you live now to Downing Street, where Beth Rigby is for us, and she's got the latest on Theresa May's cabinet reshuffle. Beth, what can you tell us?
Hi there. Well, we're still waiting for cabinet ministers to come in. Hopefully that means they've either got a job keeping theirs or having a promotion. But I can tell you that it looks like James Brokenshire will be staying as Northern Ireland Secretary. And the reason I can tell you this is that the Irish government have just put a press release out saying that James Brokenshire is due to go and meet the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Charlie Flanagan. James Brokenshire's staying too. So far that looks like 5 of her cabinet and herself all still in place.
OK, thank you, Beth Rigby there in Downing Street. We'll bring you the latest on that throughout the afternoon. Meanwhile, negotiations with the EU on Brexit are due to start in just over a week. And the European leaders are saying they want to get going straight away. So how will all this uncertainty at home affect the EU's negotiating stance? Well, joining us from North London is Charles Grant, Director of the Centre for European Reform. And Mr Grant, just talk us through, are negotiations, in your opinion, going to start on time?
Well, we can't be quite sure, but the British government has told the 27 other countries of the EU that they should start on time on the 19th of June, very soon indeed. It is possible that a cabinet reshuffle may lead to some delays, but I don't expect so. However, do remember that the first rounds of negotiation were always going to be about the process, deciding how to structure the meetings, not the substance. So if the new British government wants a few weeks to work out if it's changing its strategy on Brexit, it can do so and start talking about the process in the meantime.
And I'm interested to know, are we being mocked by Europe, or are they genuinely quite worried over what's happened?
It's a bit of both. There's really a lot of frustration on the EU side. Even before the election, when I guess they expected Theresa May would win quite a healthy majority, there was a lot of frustration with the fact that they think the British government was not very well prepared for the negotiations, that we didn't have enough technical experts mastering the various dossiers. And when they'd met Theresa May in recent weeks, they got the impression she didn't really understand how complicated and difficult the talks would be. And they started to wonder if some of her key officials were actually passing on the right messages to her. That was before the election. Now the election's happened and she's clearly a much weaker person. They're very worried that she's not going to be a strong enough partner for them to deal with. If supposing Britain has to do a painful compromise on an issue like how much money we pay the EU to get out, or the role of the Court of Justice, is she going to be strong enough to push those compromises through the House of Commons past her own Eurosceptic right wing? And they're very worried that she may not be strong enough to make a deal stick.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're just showing pictures on the screen at the moment of Downing Street because we are expecting in the next hour or so details of her cabinet reshuffle. How much manoeuvre does she have in Europe, though? You mentioned at home there, but do you think she can cut a deal, and are we likely to see a softer Brexit?
Well, I think there is a real chance of a softer Brexit, and that's how it looks to our partners at the moment, because there is no longer a majority in the House of Commons for the hard version of Brexit that Mrs May was preparing us for, namely reducing economic ties with the continent in order to maximise British sovereignty. The view on the continent, which happens to be my view too, is that Mrs May will have to abandon some of her own extreme right-wingers in her own party and work with the opposition parties on a cross-party basis in Parliament to push for a softer version of Brexit. What could that mean? That could mean not staying in the single market. I think that's not feasible. That would mean accepting free movement of labour. But it could mean staying in the customs union, so we don't have a lot of bureaucratic controls when goods go in and out between Britain and the EU. It could mean staying in some of the regulatory agencies. It could mean going for relatively modest restrictions on EU migration. This is all to play for, but our partners believe there is a real chance of a softer variety of Brexit that actually would be much better in their view for the British economy.
And she always said, didn't she, that she was promoting strong and stable leadership. It seems we've got anything but now. But looking ahead to these negotiations, should we be worried? Is it best that she stays in place, or perhaps it would be better to have a change of leader? What's your opinion on that?
Well, the 27 will have to negotiate with whoever represents the British government. I guess from the point of view of getting a good outcome, it's not good to have a weak leader who is likely to fall on her sword or be overthrown in a couple of weeks or a couple of months' time, because then you're kind of wasting the negotiating time. I think everybody would rather they were negotiating with a strong partner. But I would say it's not so much to the leader of the Tory party that matters so much as whether that Tory leader, whether it's Mrs May or somebody else after her, works with the opposition in Parliament to get a British position on Brexit, a parliamentary position on Brexit. That would be strong, that would be stable, that would be able to make the compromising necessary. I think our partners hope that a strong position emerges, even though that'll probably be based on more than one political party and the Conservatives having to work with some of the opposition.
So who, in your opinion, do you think would be a good alternative to Theresa May?
Well, purely personally, I think of those senior Tories I've seen recently, I would go for Amber Rudd, perhaps rather than Boris Johnson if she wants the job. The trouble with Boris is he's very unpopular with our partners because they hold him personally responsible for Brexit. They also remember the articles he used to write when he was a journalist in Brussels. Indeed, I was a journalist in Brussels at the same time with him, which were not entirely truthful in every respect, let me put it politely. And so he's actually quite a damaged his reputation is quite damaged in the eyes of many of our partners. If he becomes Prime Minister, that would make it very difficult to build trust between Britain and the others. I think somebody like Amber Rudd, who comes over as a more moderate and emollient figure, could be very successful. But also Philip Hammond, if he wanted the job, is well known and trusted amongst our partners because they've dealt with him as Foreign Secretary and more recently as Chancellor of the Exchequer. But I would say our partners would hope it's somebody, but not Boris.
Well, Amber Rudd only just got through by the skin of her teeth, keeping her job as an MP. So how about someone like David Davis?
Well, I think David Davis has made a fairly good impression on our partners in preparing for the Brexit talks. The fact that he was originally a Brexiteer probably gives him credibility with the Tory party at home. And the fact that he's more emollient and softer on some issues like migration than some Tory Eurosceptics means his reputation isn't too bad with our partners. I think they think he's developed in the job of Brexit Secretary. To begin with, there was a lot of grandstanding, a lot of kind of rhetoric from him, tub-thumping rhetoric appealing to the Tory base. In recent months, he's been more moderate in his public pronouncements. I think there is a question as to whether he's a master of detail. The answer is probably he's not. But nevertheless, he's quite a likeable fellow, it's seen by our partners, and he's developed a fairly good relationship with Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator. So I think if he turns out to be the Tory leader, that would not be disastrous from our partner's point of view at all.
OK, Mr Grant from North London at this lunchtime, thanks very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Well, let's get a check on the weather now, shall we?
As a cool evening settles over India, the lights shine bright on a crisp New York night.
It'll be a fairly windy day with sunny spells of showers spreading to many areas, but the southeast will be mainly dry. There'll be plenty of sunshine there. Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland will see widespread showers through the rest of the afternoon. Some will be heavy with hail and thunder, but there will also be some sunny spells in between. Elsewhere, East Anglia and southeast England will stay mainly dry, whilst Wales and the north and west of England will see showers becoming largely confined to northwest England. Most of southern Britain will be fine into the evening. England and Wales will be mainly dry overnight, although the odd shower can't be ruled out, but Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland will see further showers. It will stay quite mild, but it will be fresher in the southeast.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, we'll have all the latest on Theresa May's expected reshuffle.